So you must have done them others Friday.
Friday and yesterday.
Because others for Friday. Talked to them.
Yeah, he gets his part and goes gets his stuff.
And everybody knows him.
At fires they do.
Hey Shirley, how you feeling?
The bagger,
This is my mask, my face mask.
How you feeling?
Okay, just kind of shook up,
Yeah, that one shaking.
kind of sore.
I was telling David some of them. It's my nephew's wife. She fell down the steps. And they said about her, she fell down the steps.
Oh, they do.
Two
Get
places.
up.
I fell backwards. I didn't really hit the steps. I just fell to the ground.
Oh.
I was trying to get a TV stand down the steps, and it was oak, and I had it turned upside down and was sliding it down the steps.
Yeah.
But it was too heavy, and it took off. And we both went flying down the steps, but it kind of went this way, and I went that way.
I guess the important question is the TV table, okay?
It's oak.
No,
That should tell you enough.
It landed on her, but she didn't realize it.
No, it didn't land on me.
Well, it must have because you.
I got a bruise, but that's because I think as it started down, it hit me in the front. And I had a big bruise, and then I had a big bruise on my tailbone. But I was probably had another 5 steps to go, and I just kind of went to the floor. I didn't hit any steps.
She didn't think she bumped her head, but then the DR, they bumped her spot on top of her head, but she did bump it on the corner of her head.
Wow.
It
Where
was,
was Dave on this?
he was in the garage playing fisherman.
I got carried something in the house from the garage, so I didn't know she was coming. She said, Dave, I said, I'll wait there in a minute.
And I said, after it was all over, I should have said, Dave, I've fallen and
This is
shaken
our
up."
future.
Hello?
I'll see you in a
Hey,
minute.
Dave, I'll be there in a minute.
What's your hurry? Don't rush me.
I didn't know she had fallen.
Oh,
Oh, boy.
well,
But I'm still sore. But when you first fall like that, it's like you have to lay there and wait till the body catches up.
Yeah.
It's like everything's done.
we'll just jump right up and pick up.
Right, first service is just getting out, so start for a couple minutes.
What do you say, Dave?
I'm doing
Oh, good. That's not right.
Yeah. Is that your screensaver?
Hey, good job. Yeah. Where are you doing that?
My wife is always late, so I can't go all the way. You may find me.
I thought you got in trouble with system metropolitan. Could be.
Dave thought you fell down the steps.
Good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
Good week. You have a good week. So bad for him. I just wonder what's going to be the outcome of all of this.
Another sign.
We're blocking your view.
No. No, I said I don't see the books. I take attendance in it.
All right, we're gonna get started. Just a side note, has nothing to do with anything that we talked about in Michigan's football game last night. We won huge, but I thought it was interesting that the coaching staff utilized 73 of the 74 players. The only guy that didn't get to play was the second string backup long snapper. I think I would have called a timeout, set up a punt, Just kidding. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. They used
I saw that.
73 players. All right, today we're going to be talking about in between the Testament. In between the Testaments, that period that we don't really have a lot of information about, unless you're a book nerd and like to read really long historical books. But each thing contributed to the story and how it impacts the New Testament reading and how that carries forth the story. So the first thing to look at is the powers. There was like 5 major powers during that time. First was Babylon. Who can tell me what was significant about Babylon?
Destruction of Jerusalem.
What's that?
Destruction of Jerusalem.
Destruction of Jerusalem. These aren't in your notes, so kind of relax for a few minutes. They came in because of Israel's sin, because God said enough's enough. I'm sending Babylon, destroys Jerusalem, destroys, exports the people. Who was one of the most well-known deportees? Daniel. He was in that time frame. He was exported to another place. Persia. What's Persia known for?
Pretty much world domination.
Domination, but as far as Israel's concerned.
Did they spread the people out?
What's that?
Did they spread the people about?
Well, they did. Well, actually, Babylon's philosophy was every place we conquer, we're going to deport the people, we're going to keep good people for us. Everyone else had to be spread out, had to form their own communities. Persia was just the opposite. Babylon was controlled by spreading them out. Persia allowed different groups to return. So they allowed Israel to return. What's significant about this, Babylon doesn't really carry the story forward. It's just kind of a footnote, Israel's destroyed. What it does contribute is more of a psychological. Because what did they do? They destroyed the temple, and they also pretty much the land. So they took away Israel's identity in their temple and in their land. The only thing they had left was the law, and that becomes important. Persia allows them to return somewhat. 3 famous people from this period. Esther was a part of this, and also Ezra and Nehemiah were part of that return. So they allowed the return. What did Greece bring to the picture? If you've been to seminary, you participate in this because you've had to take Greek.
Did they?
So they brought culture and language. A common language that they could use throughout the world, international language. Israel, for a short time, under the Maccabees, had freedom. And then we have Rome. What did Rome bring to the picture?
Domination and failure.
Domination. But specifically, what did they bring to help the New Testament story?
They created roads.
Roads and systems. And also somewhat, I'm just going to put systems, and that allowed the gospel to go forward. These 2 things, language and systems, roads, allowed specifically Paul to spread the gospel. Rome also brought a sense of even though it was forced, but a sense of stability. So there was kind of a, even though it was a forced thing, there was still somewhat stability. Do you know what the problem here was? This was the Maccabean revolt. For roughly 160 years, Israel's independent, and that plays a factor, and we're going to talk about a little bit later. But what was the problem here, which brought these guys in? The Maccabean family, the main guy, he passed away, left it to his sons. His sons couldn't figure out what they were going to do, how they're going to do it. So they said, Rome, why don't you come in and help us? Rome was all too eager to come in and help them settle, and very shortly Rome says, guess what? We're not going to help you, we're going to take you over. But these things kind of move the story into the New Testament. And I'm just going to briefly touch on publications, so we're not going to talk about that, but during that time you had the Septuagint. Who knows what the Septuagint is? Come on, you know it.
Yeah, it's the Greek translation
Yeah.
of our Old Testament.
Yeah. Jacob's like, I know it, I got a class on this, I know it. It was the Greek language for the Old Testament. Then you had these things called pseudeographes, which are writings from either an individual or a group of writings, a school of thought, just kind of writings. They weren't really important. Some historical insights, but nothing more than that. Then you also have the Apocrypha developing. Even some denominations, some beliefs still utilize the Apocrypha. And there's some interesting readings in that. The most significant one is the Maccabees, a historical account of Israel's rebellion and short-lived freedom. So those kind of writings were developed. The Septuagint, the Greek, used the Old Testament so that everyone could read the Old Testament. What was the problem with that? We'll get into that a little bit. But what do you think the problem would be with the Septuagint?
Not everybody knew the Greek.
Well, most people knew the Greek. I mean, it was becoming a common language. That's why they kind of developed it. If you were a conservative, traditional Jewish person, the idea that you would translate God's Word into Greek, common language, and not use the Hebrew might not sit well with you. So it was kind of a sticking point. And then you have some politics within Israel going on. And you had the temple versus the synagogue. The temple was the main, in between this time, after this, and during this time, Israel is allowed to rebuild their temple. But the temple became corrupt, even though it was the center of their religious status and also their political situation. It was becoming corrupt. What's the one example of the corruption in the temple?
Selling.
Selling. When Jesus cleared out the temple, they were selling. It was no. What is significant, and it also plays a part into the whole of the New Testament. Why is Jesus clearing out the temple significant? Why was one reason why Jesus was so irritated at it? I guess I should ask it this way. What area of the temple did he clear out?
The court of Gentiles.
Court of Gentiles. There was an area where Gentiles, God-fearing, God-seeking people could come to the temple to worship, to meditate, whatever. What was going on when Jesus cleared the temple? A lot of noise. Animals and sellers and everything going on. And these Gentiles who knew very little but they knew this was a place to worship, couldn't worship because of all the noise and the selling and all the corruption. So one of the things that was significant about that was, Jesus said, this is my house is going to be a house of prayer. All nations can come to it. And you've allowed, because of your corruption and your selling, you've allowed these people not to hear, not to meditate, not to pray. So get out. And that was also important because Jesus was coming for all people. Then you have the synagogue. They were more local, more grassroots, probably a little bit more real. The temple, you had the big ceremonies. The synagogue, they would meet, the priest or whoever was in charge of the synagogue would give a meditation of the word. Maybe a traveling priest, like Jesus did sometimes, a rabbi, would give some kind of word. They would discuss it. Maybe they had a time of, hey, how's the farm going? Or maybe, how can we help you? Or there was a lot of real community stuff. And so there's a contention. Do we go to the temple that's corrupt, or do we talk about the law more locally? Then you had the Sadducees versus the Pharisees. The Sadducees were connected with the ruling class. They were more political in their outlook. They were more concerned about power and wealth and keeping the peace. They also controlled the Sanhedrin, the court, which is ruled by the high priest. The Pharisees were more grassroots. They came from the common people for the most part. And that's why when they confronted Jesus, they were afraid to lose their status with the common people. They were also more conservative, and we're going to talk about these more specifically later. But they were thought of themselves as keepers of holiness, purity. Then they had the Herodians, King Herod, versus the Essenes. Why is King Herod a problem? Does anybody know one of the reasons? A couple of reasons. Where did Herod come from? He was an Edomite. Who was supposed to rule Israel? Someone from the line of David. So not only was he not of the right lineage, he also compromised incredibly. He pretty much sold out to Rome. Then you had the Essenes. They decided our response to culture, to all this going on, is to pull away. Let's go out in the desert, let's meditate, let's think about the law, let's pull away from culture. Then you have the publicans. Publicans and tax collectors are generally the same. These guys collected taxes for Herod and also for Rome. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's why these guys are so hated. Then you have the Zealots. Their response to Rome was military action. Jesus challenged, confronted every one of these groups, or encountered every one of these groups, turned them upside down. And when we understand this, and kind of this flow of history, we begin to understand how radical Jesus was, and how some of his statements really totally just changed everything. So some of these, all these groups really had the same goal. Do you know what that goal was? Any idea?
Freedom from Rome.
Freedom from Rome, partly. But what else? They wanted to restore Israel to its glory. They wanted to bring God's presence back into it. They wanted God's favor. And how do they do? Well, we'll do it by setting up ceremonies in the temple. No, we need to do it by local communities. Oh no, we need to follow the laws of the land. Oh no, we need to be pure. Oh, we need to have a king. Doesn't matter where he comes, but we need to have a king. Oh no, we need to pull away. That's how God's going to come here. Publicans, well, they were just the dregs of society. They didn't have an opinion. The Zealots were like, let's do this thing. Let's be Maccabees. Let's go kill people. Let's take military action. Jesus confronts each and every one of those thought processes and realized most of these people realized Jesus wasn't going to do what he thought. Challenge the temple, irritate people in the synagogue, irritated these people. These people didn't get along because of their political differences. They didn't get along with these guys until Jesus comes along. Then they team up and go, we've got to figure out how to get rid of this prophet, this rabble-rouser. Let's combine forces. So he confronted each one of those. So now we're going to look at two groups that came out of this period to show how radical Jesus was.
Yeah, a question on Herod. He was the king, he was a Jew and the king. Did Rome have a person there, stationed there, like would be in control?
Well, they sort of did, but they appointed Herod with the understanding that we'll appoint you and let you rule, but you do what we say. And as soon as he didn't do what they said, they started bringing in people. But Herod liked his position, so he wasn't going to rock the boat. So it was kind of a compromise type of thing. I want to do this, but I'm not sure how to do it, so I'm not sure how this is going to work. You guys are Pharisees. You guys are purveyors of holiness. You guys know what's going on. You're pure. You guys are Samaritans. You're good people, for the most part. These guys are half-breeds. They're not even Jews. You know what? These Pharisees think you're just scum. They don't even like you. They didn't think you should be on the earth. What do you think? You guys like each other?
No.
Not the least. There was this conflict, this constant conflict between it. And if you really want to preach it, into this conflict steps who? Prince of Peace. But not a peace like, oh, let's get along, kumbaya. It was a peace that first irritates, then you got to repent, and then come back. So let's look at, now we're going to get into your notes. That was a lot longer than I thought. All right. The Samaritans. Let's look at a few things from the Samaritans. First of all, they developed as a group from this period when everyone was scattered. They intermarried, so they formed this group called the Samaritans. So they were intermarriage. So if you're a Pharisee, you go, purity, well, they aren't keeping with the purity of the law. They aren't keeping purity. So we got to disregard that. But some of their beliefs are this. They accepted only the first 5 books, the law. So when they talk about the prophets, they say, yeah, prophets don't know what they talk about. It's whatever God told us in the first 5 books. They believed in one God, so that's good. They believed that Mount Gerizim was the true place for sacrifice, not Jerusalem. So there's a conflict there. There would be a future judgment. They believed that God would right all wrongs in the future. And they also believed of a prophet like Moses, of Deuteronomy 18:18, that would come. But the tensions between the Jews and the Samaritans was so strong that when, I don't know how to pronounce his name, John Hyrcanus. Anyway, he was a grandson of John Maccabee, the original Maccabee. And he decided to destroy the Samaritan temple. It doesn't set well when you destroy someone's sacred place. The Samaritans retaliated. They scattered bones of Jewish people in Jerusalem, in the Jerusalem temple, during the Passover celebration. They also massacred several pilgrims during Passover celebration. So the tension, it wasn't just, oh, we don't like them. There was deep-seated hatred and mistrust between Samaritans and the Jews. They believed, they saw themselves as Jewish, but yet distinct from Jewish. So that they had that, we're Jewish, but we're not quite, we're distinct from them. How did the tension express itself in the Gospels?
Well, the Jews would avoid the Samaritans at all
What's that?
costs. The Jews would avoid the Samaritans at all costs.
And the Samaritans likewise. They would avoid going through the areas if at all possible. What does Jesus do? I must go through Samaria. Like, no, you can't go there. They don't like us. We don't like them. No, I'm going to Samaria. John chapter 4, 4:9. I'll read it because I've got it right here. This is where Jesus encounters a Samaritan woman at a well. You know the discussion, give me water. How can you give me water? But 4:9, and some of these statements we're going to make in the next few minutes are just statements to show how the tensions were. John 4:9. Then the woman of Samaria said to them, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. So just that statement that John makes, why are you dealing with me? I'm a Samaritan, I'm a woman. So there's that tension right there, right off the bat. Why are you doing this? Well, we know Jesus, he's going to do a lot of different things. Okay, someone read Luke 17:16.
And he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan.
So in here we have lepers, and Luke does a wonderful job of bringing us out. You have Samaritans and lepers together. If you were a Pharisee and you heard this story, what would be your first thought when Jesus said, the lepers and Samaritans? What would you think?
Why would he be?
What's that?
Why would he expose himself to such impure people? Or
Yeah. The other thought would be, well, of course Samaritans and lepers are going to be together. That's where they belong. That would have been your first thought on hearing this story. If you're a Samaritan, go, wait a minute. We're a despised people, but all of a sudden this prophet, this priest, is making us out to be the hero. You feel pretty good now, all of a sudden, right? We're like, one of us is a hero of the story. One of us is better than someone over here. We're okay. Jesus makes the Samaritans the hero of his stories in several occasions. Continuing in chapter 17, and I haven't really fully developed this thought, but after some challenging things, like in 17:1, Jesus tells the disciples there's going to be challenges, there's going to be offenses. How are you going to handle it? The first response of the disciples was, increase our faith. You all know the second part of that verse. What is it? If you have faith like a mustard seed, if you say to this mulberry bush, be moved. That's the part we like. That's the part that gets quoted. That's the part that gets on coffee cups. Mustard seed faith. Makes a great logo. Then he goes on for some further teachings. Then he brings in the story of the 10 lepers cleansed. And Luke makes the point of the one that came back was a Samaritan. Like a couple times he mentions the fact that the one that worshipped was a Samaritan. He was a Samaritan. And verse 19, arise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. So in this section, Luke starts out with increase our faith. So we have, all right, this is all gone, so I can write some other notes. So we have increased faith, and then your faith. I'm thinking part of what Jesus was saying, what Luke was saying for this, is increase our faith, not so much the mustard seed faith, but do you have faith like a Samaritan? Do you have faith like a rejected people? Do you have faith as a leper? When everything else, your world is completely gone nuts, you've lost everything, do you have faith? Do you have faith like a Samaritan? Not do you have faith like a Jewish person. Do you have faith like a Samaritan? Not the mustard seed, the Samaritan. And I think the way he frames this narrative gives us a better understanding of faith. Faith isn't so much growing big bushes and getting all everything, but faith may have more to do with how do we live out our life according to God's plans, no matter what that faith looks like. And so he's using the Samaritans as, again, heroes. Luke 10:33, we know the story. The parable of the Good Samaritan. Again, Luke does, let's look at that, Luke 10:33. So he's telling the story, and I think when we have the disadvantage of reading the story. There's a whole difference when you're actually hearing someone tell the story. And Jesus draws his audience in to this person who's despised, and you've got people not liking him. And he might pause for a minute. But a Samaritan. Some of the people that would have heard that would have went, I'm not listening to this story. We have a tendency when we're watching, well, Joe will watch like Hallmark movies or some of those movies, and I'll act like I'm watching, but I'm usually doing something else. But she has a tendency, and some of those movies are like, even though it's Hallmark, they're starting to push the limits. When you have 2 guys, 2 girls, whatever, not watching this anymore. I think the same thing would have happened when Jesus said that. They're telling a story, it's a good story, all of a sudden put a Samaritan. And this guy's a false prophet, I'm not listening to it. They would have turned him off as soon as he brought in the Samaritans. But again, the Samaritan becomes the hero, and the parable is an answer to the question, who was my neighbor? And I think the important thing here to understand is when Jesus says love your neighbor, doesn't mean love the people that you like. love the people that are closest to you. It may mean showing some kind of love to people whom you thought weren't good enough. And that's where Jesus really confronts and challenges us, because he's saying, look, you've got to love your neighbor. And he says, go and do likewise. In other words, go and be like a Samaritan. Go and love your neighbors like a Samaritan. That would have been hard to swallow. Like, I'm not going to be like those people. No, go do likewise. Love your neighbor. And finally, John 8:48. Someone go ahead and read that. And again, it's just a summary statement to showing the tension between these groups and why Jesus is so radical. John 8:48.
Then the Jews answered and said to him, do we not say rightly that you are a Samaritan and have a demon?
So for the Pharisees, the leaders, the Sadducees, whoever they were linking Samaritans with demons. So they're saying that to Jesus in a derogatory way, we are Samaritan, you have a demon, those two go together, you can't be from God. So just taking that statement to say that God is calling us to a different way, and the Samaritans and they were linked, they weren't liked, well, like Jesus says, go and do likewise, love the Samaritans. And then we come to the Pharisees. Again, they were a more conservative group. They were keepers of purity and holiness. And when we talk about the Greeks, I erased it, what is the term used for adapting to Greek culture? Does anybody know?
Hellenization.
Hellenization. So the Pharisees despised anything that was Hellenized, if you will, or Greek. Because what happened is a lot of people adapted to the Greek way of life, Greek thoughts, Greek processes, and all that. The Pharisees are like, we've got to get back to God's holiness. We've got to get back to purity, and anything outside, any foreign intrusion is not going to work. That's why they didn't like Samaritans, because they weren't pure. Anybody who didn't follow the law wasn't pure. Anybody that compromised with Greek wasn't pure. Tax collectors were not pure because they compromised and were corrupt. And now they saw in Jesus a whole bunch of stuff that they didn't like. All kinds of compromises. They had issues with them. So we need to understand their hostility towards it. But to play the devil's advocate, the Pharisees weren't necessarily bad people. They just were really concerned about gaining back God's favor. They just didn't know how to do it. They wanted to get Israel back on track, and the only way they knew how was, let's be pure, let's keep holiness, let's be strict about this. The problem is they took it overboard and compromised and set up their own stuff.
Quick question. Of all of these different groupings and their feelings even towards each other, was there a cultural pressure for John Q. Public to identify with one of those groups or not?
No, I think John, you talking about John the Baptist?
No, just John Q. Public. In other
Well, the
words,
Pharisees,
did they have to identify with one of those groups?
they would have to, but they probably did.
Okay.
The Pharisees kind of came from the common people, so they were kind of like, oh, guy down the street is a Pharisee. I like him. He's okay. They might have that way. And it just depends on probably their own personalities. You know, if they were aggressive, they'd go, oh yeah. Well, no one wanted to associate with these guys because they collect taxes. So. But these guys, yeah, I could fight. Or you go, well, King Herod's not doing so bad. He's adopted to Greek culture and he's adopted Rome. He's not doing so bad. I could live with a little extra cash. I'll be all right. It seems like, maybe I could go live out in the desert, get away from society. I get that. Sometimes people are way overrated and you want to get away from them.
But that was internally.
Yeah.
Rather than external pressure, right?
Yeah, maybe family, depending on where the family grew up. You have a, you know, okay, kind of like here, you grow up either Republican or Democrat, depending on your family, depending on the situation. You may lean that way or whatever. So it just, I think a lot of internal things more than pressure.
Thank you.
Although I think some of these groups might have said, look, if you don't follow our ways, you're going to be excommunicated. And they did that a lot. So there was that kind of external pressure.
I think there were people that just didn't care either way.
Oh yeah, because
just because you were a Jew or a Samaritan doesn't necessarily mean you follow whatever they follow.
Well, part of the problem was the common people, we'll look at it in a minute, they were more concerned about surviving. Yes, they had their political leanings or whatever, but they were more concerned about surviving than anything else. You know, the synagogues, they were more like, hey, let's keep our people together and keep them safe. And we'll deal with whether we follow the law 100% later, but we're in survival mode. Let's look at a couple things from the Pharisees. Just off the, you know, they had issues with the law. They thought, you know, we got to keep the law. So one of the things they had with Jesus was he broke the law when he healed on the Sabbath. And miracles were relatively common, or healings were common during that time. So they weren't questioning his healings, per se, but the fact that he did it on the Sabbath. Or he did certain things on the Sabbath. So Sabbath breaking was a big one. Someone read Mark 7:3, because the other thing they were concerned with is ceremonial purity, cleansing, that type of thing. So someone read Mark 7:3.
For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they carefully wash their hands, thus observing the traditions of the elders.
So Mark brings out the idea of there's some kind of cleansing, some kind of purity. We've got to follow the rigid laws. And then they also questioned his deity. We need to look it up because we're running out of time, but Luke 5:21 talks about a sign. Okay, if you're who you say you are, give us a sign. So they're kind of questioning his deity, kind of like, okay, if you're this person, you know, show us a sign from God. But their hypocrisy comes out as well. In Mark 3:6, they joined with the Herodians, who they didn't like. Why? Because they compromised. They followed kind of along with Rome and Greek culture and those kinds of things. They didn't really like them because they weren't pure. But they compromised and joined forces with the Herodians. They joined with the Sadducees, who were more politically motivated, more concerned with wealth and power when it came to Jesus. Another problem, they had trouble with Jesus, including Samaritans, making Samaritans the heroes, dining with publicans and sinners, and bringing all these other people, Gentiles. They had trouble with Jesus having a meal with these outsiders, because outsiders are going to affect the purity of our faith, and God's not going to honor us if we do that. What do? They have a meal with Jesus on several occasions. They eat with him. Of course, those meals were usually had an agenda to them, and they usually wanted to confront Jesus, but nonetheless, they joined with Jesus in a meal when just before it's like, Why are you eating with those people? Oh, we'll eat with you, but we want to kind of trap you, type of thing. So we understand these backgrounds and these tensions. It really helps us understand the reading. So we read about the Samaritans, we go, it's not just another group, there were some real tensions. When we read about the Pharisees going, yeah, they want to keep things pure, and that's why Jesus upset them, because they weren't like they're supposed to. All right, real quick. Life in general. The local person, the average person, paid close to 50% in taxes. At least. They paid local taxes. They paid regional taxes. They paid taxes to Rome. They also paid a temple tax. And here's where the publicans and tax collectors got in trouble, because it was a system rife for corruption. And all Rome would say was, you need to collect so much. Tax collectors would go, but you know what? I got to make some money here too. You're crossing my road, there's going to be a tax to go into this village. So they would collect other taxes as well. Is there any wonder why Jesus was criminalized for hanging out with these people? I mean, these people are like, you think the IRS is bad? These guys were ruthless, because they had to make money too. But part of the problem was they weren't necessarily bad, they were corrupt for sure. They were just trying to survive. They were just trying to make a living. It's like, I don't know what else to do. The farmer's defunct, the sheep are gone. I got to do something. I can't fish, I can't do that. They started collecting taxes, but they collected more than their fair share. So that's why when Jesus, in the back page of your notes, the miracle of feeding the multitude attracted such a large crowd. Because they weren't necessarily interested in this teacher, although it was good. They just wanted some food. They just wanted to survive. They wanted, hey, this guy's providing food, I'll follow him. Until he says, take up your cross and die. Give up everything you have. But there was this issue. And that's why one of the issues in the early church was attending to the widows. That was a big, big issue. And it also tied into the identity of the Jewish people was with the promises to Abraham and David, which dealt with land, king, and a kingdom. But what was the problem? No Davidic king on the throne. They were not in control of the land, and they were still under foreign oppression. That was a big tension there. And the other thing with not only just Samaritans, but the Gentiles, in the early church, a big issue was ethnic tension. Acts chapter 15, they actually had to have a council to deal with this issue. How do we deal with these Gentiles that are coming into the faith? Galatians and Ephesians deal with a lot of the ethnic tension that was going on. Because the church started out Jewish, but it increasingly became Gentile in nature and look and all that. How do you handle it? These guys got to be circumcised, they got to do this, they got to do that. They got to follow the law of Moses. Paul said, wait, no. It's only faith in Christ that brings us together. And the solution is found in Galatians 3:28. And that is being one in Christ. Christ just annihilates any ethnic distinction. It's in Christ that we're united. So we understand these tensions and understand kind of what's going on behind the scenes. It gives us a little bit more color to why Jesus was so radical and so different and so earth-shaking. And I think sometimes in our position, looking back, we lose some of that because we got comfortable, accustomed to 20th century living in the church, that we don't realize the statements that Jesus made in his actions were absolutely radical. And he turned everything on its head. All these people that thought this is the way to God's kingdom, this is the way God's blessed. No. These guys, you got to get out in the desert. You got to get away from people. What does Jesus do? Goes right in the middle of the crowd, gathers the outsiders, gathers the religious people, gathers them together, walks in cities, walks in villages, and they go, man, God's not got on you. You're mixing, you're touching people that you shouldn't be touching. Jesus was so radical. We don't understand it. So when you read the New Testament, understand that Jesus was radical. He changed his lives dramatically. Next week we're going to look at everyone's favorite subject, prophecy. But we're only going to look at a few messianic prophecies to continue the unfinished story. Then we're going to wrap up in 2 weeks on the fulfillment and how even in the fulfillment it turned these people upside down. They weren't expecting a certain element of Jesus. So next week we'll look at some prophecies and how the unfinished story goes forward. And we'll wrap up with fulfillment. All right, that's it. Have a good day.
No, the little guy was trying to fever Friday night. We played it safe and stayed home.
Oh, you got it?
One try.